No matter how many times you hear that story, it remains absolutely riveting. And no matter how many times you actually hear those same words, they're a doorway to a state of higher consciousness, so they're ever new. Just the way Master described Satchidananda itself, it's ever new. Because obviously we ourselves evolve and have experiences that awaken us to greater potentialities of our own consciousness. So you hear the same story and then all of a sudden it means something that it didn't mean before. I believe that it's true that this was Jyotish and Devi who asked Swami this question. They must have said this in some public lecture that I heard. Knowing that Jyotish was Swamiji's appointed successor and that they would have to have the life that they've had now, these last 4 years since Swamiji passed. And Swamiji's own life was so full of challenges. It started when he was 9 years old and became quite ill and had to be sent away from his family to go to a better climate, and went to a boarding school at such a young age, and coming to America and being misunderstood and all the way through, including and above all the way his own Guru Bhais treated him, constant rejection, humiliation, lawsuits, constant financial struggles, enormous health issues that just went on and on and on. So one would naturally ask the question, if I'm to step into those shoes, does everything that was in those shoes come with it? And Swamiji's answer was, oh no, that was the tapasya that God asked of me. And he didn't say it in exactly this way, but what will happen to you will be appropriate to you. What happened to me was appropriate to me. Of course, we're all different sizes and we all have different karmic patterns. So no one ever gets exactly what someone else has, or even if you have it, it feels differently to you because it's unraveling a different set of misunderstandings. So when we read the life of Christ, which of course is crucifixion, humiliation, and death, it's a bit of a scary prospect. Who would really want this teaching? And so far in our lives, we haven't had to walk in those kinds of shoes, although even in contemporary times, many people who have been devoted to Jesus have faced just that kind of persecution. There's the extraordinarily both inspiring and frightening story of Richard Wurmbrand and his wife Sabina, who were, he was a converted Jew, first persecuted by the Nazis in Romania. Then when Romania was given over to Stalin and became communist, he then was persecuted as a converted Christian. And there was a moment when the new regime was systematically dismantling the churches. And Richard Wurmbrand tells this story. And all the pastors and preachers in the city were called, I think it was Bucharest, called into a particular church. And there were some clergy people who had already been intimidated or bought off by the atheistic communists. And so they were all subjected to this mockery, blasphemous presentation about how Christianity and religion and churches and so on were absolutely of no value anymore now that the communists had come. And everyone was terrified. And they're all sitting here. And Sabina, the wife, turns to her husband, Richard, and says, "Who will wipe from the face of Jesus this stain of blasphemy?" And Richard was conscious of what would happen if he protested, and he turned to his wife and he said, "If I stand up and speak, you will no longer have a husband," meaning he would be killed. And she said, "If you do not speak, I no longer have a husband." So he stood up. And I believe for about 13 years he was imprisoned, and she was imprisoned. Now, that's the story of Jesus' own life, and what Richard Wurmbrand had to face and Sabina had to face was exactly, very much exactly what Jesus had to face. So we cling to, in the past, suffering and sorrow was the coin of man's redemption. For us now, that payment has been exchanged for joy, and we have been born, most of us, into a country where such things are not likely to happen. We were severely persecuted by the law courts, but we enjoyed the fact that we could go home every night and sleep in our own beds, and that they could wipe us out financially, but they couldn't touch us physically. And believe me, we thought a lot about that. At least we'd come to a higher age. But that doesn't mean that the essential principles illustrated by Jesus' life don't apply. And it's naive of us to imagine that they don't apply. Because as Sister Gyanamata said, everything has to be given to God. It's not like we can just carve out these little things that we're going to keep for ourselves. Well, we can, and the prize for it is we get to keep them. If we decide that we'll be limited in our relationship with the divine, then we get to be limited in our relationship with the divine. And the full power and the full potential of our own consciousness simply waits for us. And we play like little children with all the toys and baubles, and if it's enough, it's enough. When somebody asked Swami Kriyananda, "Do I need a guru to find God?" Swami smiled very congenially and said, "Not if you don't think so." And he wasn't answering from scripture, he was answering from common sense. Not if you don't think so. If we wish to hold on to our little bits and pieces, we get to hold on to them. And we get the experience of profound fulfillment in exactly proportion to that. But when the sincere desire for God awakens in the soul, even if the ego hasn't quite caught up to it, the soul begins to take over. And God begins to respond to our deepest nature. And then the story of Jesus on its own terms becomes exceedingly powerful. Trouble comes. In Jesus' case, because he was so powerful in his mission, it all was acted out in the most dynamic way. He's in the Garden of Gethsemane, and the armed cohort comes. Who are you seeking? It begins right there. How many of us, when we see something difficult coming, just close our eyes to it and try with all our hearts to think this is not coming for me? How many times in our lives have we just been blinded to the inevitable because we just didn't want to know? We were just hoping that this one would pass us by. But when trouble comes to Jesus, he walks out and meets it and says even more than that. They don't even know they're looking for him. He says, "Who are you seeking?" And he says, "I'm the one. It's me. I'm the one you're looking for." And what he's describing to us is courage in the face of difficulty. That the power of God comes to us when we stand by our convictions. And we may not be required, God willing, to stand publicly and risk our lives as Richard Wurmbrand had to, and his wife risking her happiness with him. But inside ourselves, God is often asking us, how much do you love? And even more profoundly, how much do you trust me? How much faith do you really have that everything that comes to you comes from me and is for your own good? When someone I knew faced a very difficult situation and responded in a very human way, Swamiji's comment was very simple. Why are you taking this so hard? He said, why are you taking this so hard? Oh, well, I have lots of reasons why I'm taking this so hard. But Swami's response was, why are you taking this so hard? It's a very good question, isn't it? How much do we really believe that God is in charge? And how courageously can we say, who are you seeking? And even then when Pontius Pilate tries to explain to Jesus, because he finds Jesus incomprehensible, don't you understand that I have the power to free you or to crucify you? And Pilate can't understand why Jesus doesn't say a word or lift a finger to save himself. Wouldn't everyone do that? And so we find ourselves when we're facing our own Pontius Pilate, incensed mobs, dishonest charges, terrible losses. We try in every way to save ourselves. It's somebody's fault. Can't we explain it? Let's all get together and you'll understand that I'm right. Let me write a letter. Swami Kriyananda himself, to the end of his life, almost to the end, he wrote many, many letters to Dayamata especially. I should say not to the end of his life, because at the end of his life it was quite different. But he kept trying to explain it to her. Don't you understand what's really happened here? And much, much later, he said, he apologized. He said, I tried too hard to explain it to you. And he said in a certain way, he said, implied in my effort to explain it was judgment. I was judging you because I thought you were wrong, so I was trying to correct you. Now, he took another tack later and continued to try to explain, but he took the personal out of it. I tried to explain it in principle. But don't we also, why is this happening to me? And our minds go over and over and over again. Why couldn't it have been different? Why couldn't it have been different? But Jesus is there. Pontius Pilate has the power to free him. He's asking him, give me something I can use. Jesus says nothing. I mean, he literally doesn't say a word. He just stands there. And then when Pontius says that, don't you know? Then Jesus just looks at him. He said, you have no power over me, except that God gave you power. And even now, legions of angels would rescue me. But this is what God has sent me. And there we are in our own lives, no matter how large or small our trials may look to the world, inside our own hearts, there it is. And do we defend ourselves? Do we look for the one who has the power to free us or to crucify us and try to persuade them to be different? Or even in our hearts just bang against the cages of it? Or do we say, you would have no power over me, except God has given you power? Meaning this world, its disappointments, its heartaches, our own temperament, its disappointments, its heartaches, all the ways in which we see how it could be, and then it comes out another way. The life of Jesus is our life. It's the same thing. This moment, we're here for the glorification of God. It may never show. The life of Jesus changed the course of history and continues to do so. Our glorification may just be one little spark of divinity, shining quietly in the darkness, and God's presence in our own heart saying, good for you. Good for you. Good girl, good boy. Every so often Swamiji would say that to one of us for one reason or another. Good girl, he would say. Fine work. That was my favorite, good girl. And he would say it very casually and not necessarily. He was not given to drama or flattery. So it wouldn't be, in front of everyone having you stand up and having give you 4 pages of praise. He would just quietly say, good girl. And that was everything. You knew then. I stood up to it. Once in my life, I had a very difficult test to meet. I didn't know it. And I met it, thank you, God. And afterwards he said, that was a critical juncture for you. He said, if you'd made the wrong choice, he said, you would have left the path. That's what he actually said to me. I said, why didn't you warn me? He said so simply, I didn't think it would help. He didn't think it would help me to know how much was at stake. But isn't there always everything at stake? How much do we love? How much do we trust God? And Jesus, the story of Jesus is really to show us of what the human spirit is capable and how great is the reward if we rise to the challenge. This is the part, this is the scary part. But we all know the story ends gloriously. And of course, that's us. This is the scary part. A lot of times. We might have good days and good incarnations and good decades. But this is the scary part. But we all know that the story ends happily. And I often tell myself, if it isn't the happy ending, it isn't the ending. I find great comfort in that. It's not over until it ends happily. I like to see movies that end happily. And so even if you're scared in the middle, you know it's not the end. I like old movies because they always ended happily. And you know if it's not working out now, it's not finished. Why are we taking it so hard? Those words of Swami often ring in my mind. Why are you taking this so hard? He said it's so puzzled. Do you not know? He didn't finish, but that's there. That God is always with you. That's what we have to know. I've shared with you many times the time others were in crisis, not me. But I was suffering for their suffering, and I was so miserable. And then the thought came, do you think this could be happening outside the will of God? You see, that was my little bit. That's the same as what Jesus in front of Pilate. Don't you know I have power over you? No, you have no power over me. This sorrow, this disappointment, this loss, this failing of my own nature, it has no power over me. I am my Father's child, and legions of his angels will rescue me when it be his will that it happen. Until then, why take it so hard? He is our own. We're going to end our service tonight with the purification ceremony, which I think almost all of you know. Your opportunity to come before one of the light bearers. I seek purification by the grace of God. That is your declaration. And on behalf of all the masters, the light bearer will bless you at the heart chakra. And then you may take your offering up and place it in the burning bowl. Let us be like Christ. Who are you looking for? Here I am, Lord. I am ready.